Hi weaving friends, have you ever heard about metallic yarn? Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it today and some possible ways that you might use it in your weaving. Metallic yarn can be super fun to use in a project, but there are a few quirks that you'll want to know about first before you attempt it, otherwise you might get really frustrated. So first of all, what is metallic yarn? Well, I've got one right here. Let me show you up close. Have a look at that shine and sheen. You can also see how very fine this yarn is. Let me feed some off. Very fine indeed. And also, if you give it a snap test, it will just break, drift apart, and not be very usable. So if you have seen this yarn before, you might have thought, well, I'm not going to use that for weaving because it's going to break as soon as I use it. But let me tell you about how you should be using it. It is a single yarn and it is very thin, but it can really pack a punch in a project. So what you want to do with a metallic yarn, because it is so breakable, so thin, so drifty, is you don't want to use it as a standalone yarn. You want to use it as a supplemental yarn. That means that you're going to be putting this in on top of the yarn that you are already using, whether that's in your warp or in your weft. Now this kind of really works for me because one thing I think about something like a gold sparkly yarn is that it looks fantastic if you use it sparingly. You might notice behind me, if you can see, that I've got some fairy lights. And I absolutely love fairy lights. I'm a little bit obsessed with them, really. But the thing is, if I had them all over every usable inch of my studio and had thousands of these little fairy lights shining at me, they wouldn't have the same impact as just some strategically placed fairy lights here. I've got some on my big loom and I just love to turn them on because they're not everywhere. So they really stand out. They're like a feature. I feel exactly the same about this kind of yarn, and I've got a perfect example for you. The scarf that I'm wearing is the Galaxy scarf. It's available in my Etsy shop. It's one of my rigid heddle patterns, and this is just the perfect thing to show you an example of how I would use this very yarn and how I did use this very yarn. Let's come a little closer so that you can see, and I want to show you, look at that, hang on, I'll put this down, that this metallic yarn was used strategically throughout this scarf so that it wasn't everywhere. Now, I particularly love gold on black, so that's what I've done here. But metallic yarn does come in a variety of colors. Now, this particular metallic yarn is a Maurice Brassard yarn, and it does come in a cool range of colors like purples, greens, blues, all of that. And something to look out for as well, I think, is this particular one, it's not rough at all, it's very smooth. And so it's not going to be abrasive or be problematic while you're trying to weave with it. There are some metallic yarns available that are quite rough in texture. And the other thing with having a rough textured yarn is if you're weaving it into, say, a scarf like I'm wearing here, you're not going to want that roughness rubbing on your skin all the time. That's going to be nasty and you won't want to wear it. So a rougher yarn is okay for maybe an artistic piece that's going to go on the wall or in a frame, whatever it is, but not against your skin. And so this yarn is really great for that because it's very, very smooth. Now, I talked about using it as a supplemental yarn rather than a standalone yarn. Well, the fact is you would not be able to warp with this yarn. It would just break. It would be impossible to warp with. So that's one indicator that it's not meant to be a standalone yarn. And even in the weft, I don't think that I would use this purely for weft because even though it's smooth, it's not as smooth as like a bamboo that I've used here, and I've paired the metallic yarn with the bamboo, so it works really beautifully. But if you used only this for weft, well, it's very thin for a start, but also I think it might be a little bit scratchy if you just had that for the weft. I'm not sure how it would stand up to being a standalone weft either. So how would I use this yarn? Well, if you like the Galaxy scarf pattern, you can pop over to my Etsy shop and I'll have the link down below, and you can grab that pattern and go ahead and weave your own version of this scarf. But if you just want to have a go at the yarn, incorporating it into a certain project, when you wind whether you're winding a stick shuttle or a bobbin, when you wind your regular yarn that you're using for your weft, then I would just wind this alongside of that yarn. Or if you want to use it in the warp, which is a really fantastic way to be able to do it because you can place it really strategically where you want it, then if you're warping a rigid heddle loom and you're doing a direct warp, then you can just take a strand of this through wherever you want it. Just make sure that it's tied off either at the warping peg, or you can do a full loop and back to the back of the loom and tie off at the apron rod. Or if you are warping indirectly on a warping board, same thing, just take it around where you want it with the yarn that you're using for the warp, and it's very easy to use that way, and you'll barely even know that it's there until you've got your warp all warped up and it's looking all gorgeous. Another cool option for a yarn like this might be to use it for some sort of inlay on any type of loom, and again I would use it with another yarn that is stronger than this yarn. So still always using it as a supplemental yarn. Now all the things that I've talked about today, I'm going to link down below this video. And definitely if you have any questions about metallic yarn, leave them down below. I will get back to you as soon as I can. Also let me know in the comments below, is this kind of yarn something that you might be interested for yourself? I would love to hear about your ideas as well. And until next time, happy weaving.